Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Welcome to the Art of Living show. I'm ZAFAR Majid. Today I have a special guest with me today, Afzal Shah from Apex Properties, to discuss a very important topic which is affecting, or shall I say, blighting many of our communities, especially in the Birmingham area, and that is the rise of HMOs in our communities, which people are getting sick to death of because of the antisocial behavior that they are attracting at the moment. But it's not me who's saying this, is the feedback that I have been getting from many people. But today we hear from one of the experts to tell us why and how these HMOs have come about in our community, and what does the future entail. Are they still going to continue to rise, or have we seen the peak and they are going to decline going forwards from here onwards? So let's introduce our guest. Welcome, Afzal Shah from Apex Properties. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
How you doing?
Jazakumullah for inviting me. Alhamdulillah, I'm well.
Thank you so much for coming. And it's a very important topic, and it's like the hot topic at this moment in time. Each time you open the local press, especially, I mean, this is an issue affecting the whole country at this moment in time. But I want to specifically focus on Birmingham, because these are the areas that I am familiar with, where these problems and hotspots are occurring, where antisocial behavior is on the rise. And I was reading the area most affected by HMOs at this moment in time is Streetley, and followed very closely by Handsworth, and so forth. So how did we get here?
It's a very good question. The whole idea of property and investment, looking at it from a landlord's point of view, is to maximize on their rents. And as far as tenants are concerned that are families, they do not, or in fact they can't afford those kind of rents. And these rents are paid by the government in most cases, where you have most HMOs are HMOs from the perspective of taking care of vulnerable people. You do have some HMOs on the upper end of the market, where you have professionals who've come and they have a fully serviced HMO for their needs, etc. However, the HMOs, I believe that you're trying to describe, and you've held this podcast for, is those that are vulnerable. Now, as far as if we look at it from a purely economic point of view for the landlord, there's nothing better than a HMO, because the money.
Nothing better from the landlord's point of view.
So I mean, we'll try and look at all the point of views, if you allow me. So if you look at it from a landlord's point of view, the best thing that could happen to them is that their property brings maximized rents. Those maximized rents can't happen if you have families in those properties. So you have converted a property into a housing multiple occupant property, which is a HMO abbreviation, and that will bring you twice, in some cases 2.5 times as much rent as you would get from a family. However, the point is that these properties, are they, or rather the residents of these properties, are they all people who are going to cause trouble, who are going to cause a nuisance, who are going to cause any sort of difficulties within the community? And my answer to that would be no. But at the same time, but if you just allow me to finish, but at the same time, there are people there who are genuinely vulnerable, and they need that support. And where it's being done properly, it's actually a very good provision.
We take that on board. We acknowledge that there are going to be genuine, vulnerable people who need our help, who need the government to provide accommodation for them. But what is happening is that these people, vulnerable people, tenants, are being handed over to a very scrupulous private sector, and they are actually taking houses away from private families, where they are evicting landlords. And now there's evidence of landlords evicting families with young children so they can reclaim their property and convert to a HMO just because they will be able to maximize their return on investment. Okay, I appreciate a private landlord, it's his property, he can do whatever he likes with it. But where is the ethical and moral standpoint of doing that? I mean, you are depriving a family of a home just because you want to create an HMO.
From the ethical point of view, it's quite clear that depriving a family of a home and giving it to single people because economically there's greater benefit for you as a landlord. From an ethical point of view, that may not be something that you could, you could say that, okay, fine, I've put my ethics above my economics. However,
Economics.
hear me out. However, in this particular country, nobody sleeps homeless on the streets. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the government has a provision, a duty of care, that it will house those people. Now, if anybody just does sleep on the streets, they choose to sleep on the streets. However,
a lot of people looking and listening to this will find that difficult to believe, because we see lots of people now in this current so-called cost of living crisis and economic hardship that people are enduring. There are people, not families admittedly, but people who are sleeping on the streets. So are you saying that they've got nobody else to blame but themselves, that they are sleeping on a park bench?
Well, I guess to say the word blame would probably be a bit harsh. But what I would say is that in this country, the local government in Birmingham, the Birmingham City Council, they owe a duty of care to each and every one of its citizens to be able to be housed in appropriate housing. Now, if somebody chooses to sleep on the streets, you can't stop them. They do not have to pay a single penny from their pocket, so long as they can prove that they do not have any income, which isn't difficult to prove, and they are on some sort of benefit. Often than not, it's universal credit. That then entitles them to have that housing. And in the city, there is plenty of housing, especially, I mean, as you began with the introduction to this podcast, as far as singles are concerned, because there's much more economical benefit for the provider of housing, i.e. the landlord, to be able to avail that from the government. So in that particular respect, as far as sleeping on the streets is concerned, nobody needs to sleep on the streets. Now, if anybody doesn't know this, I'd encourage them, to go to their local council and, to register themselves as homeless and do the necessary.
Kindly ask you to put that phone on silent, please.
Apologies.
Actually, causing a bit of a distraction. But look, the issue is that we are seeing communities in normal, quiet suburbs which previously were, you could label as respectable, quiet, sort of posh neighborhoods, are being blighted with HMOs, maybe because they have traditionally larger properties in those areas, which can be more profitable to convert to a HMO as opposed to a small terraced house in the inner city area. And that's not to say that inner city areas don't have HMOs, but some of the suburbs, which previously only attracted a decent sort of clientele or tenant, are now finding that they have HMOs in the midst of them, and they are causing a lot of antisocial behavior. The main perception, rightly or wrongly, is, this is again from the feedback that we have been getting, is that, oh my God, there's junkies that have moved into our area. And it's probably wrong to classify everybody as a junkie, but that is a fact. That's people with mental health issues, people with substance and drug abuse histories, or maybe they are still, involved in those addictions. They are now being placed amongst communities where families have traditionally been living without this sort of antisocial behavior. Is that correct?
Well, you see, like I mentioned at the beginning, we do have good and bad in every community and in every society, in every kind of group we can think of, and likewise it's the same here, there's no exception. However, saying that, at times we do have tenants, who do cause a nuisance, who do have antisocial behavioral issues. But the point is, you see, does the government have the capacity and the resource to be able to then create a whole new area for people like this? And does that mean to say that people like this should never be given a chance to rehabilitate within the community? Now, there are people out there who want to get off drugs. There are people out there who want to start working. There are people out there who want to be able to take that financial control of their lives and take that responsibility. But the thing is, if the community doesn't give them,
Chance.
that opportunity, it's very difficult for them to be able to come out of that rut, so to speak. And you see, the thing is, sometimes even if it's not a HMO, you have a bad neighbor. It's family, it's a bad neighbor.
Of course.
You see, now where do you put that complaint? Do you say, oh, this is a HMO? It's not. But the point is not about HMOs. The point, in actual fact, is about
the kind of people,
the tenants.
The tenants that they're actually locating or positioning amongst these communities and these HMOs.
Absolutely. And what I'd say again is that there are people who are rowdy. There are people who do, make a nuisance, and there are people who do much worse. However, the point is that that brush can't be used to tarnish,
everyone.
The whole of the HMO community.
But Afzal, at the same time, the evidence points to a greater incidence of antisocial behaviour wherever these HMOs have been placed into these communities. I appreciate there's going to be a lot of NIMBYs not in my backyard. So people who don't want them in their community, want these HMOs on their road, in their community, they think, look,
right,
please shove them away somewhere else far away. I appreciate that. At the same time, I'm also a great believer that people should be given a chance. If somebody has come out of prison, if somebody has a history of mental illness or drugs, substance abuse, and they're trying to rehabilitate themselves, yes, I agree they should be given a chance. But my biggest fear is that these people, vulnerable people, are being handed over to a scrupulous sector, the private sector, where landlords are actually using them to make money. And they are not really doing anything to rehabilitate them and to ease them back into or help them get back into the community or back on their feet. These are landlords whose pure and social aim is just to make money.
I'll repeat my earlier point that in every society, community, and every group of people, there's a good and bad. Likewise, within the landlords
are you denying
and the managing agents,
are you denying that there isn't a high sort of percentage of scrupulous landlords who are operating in this sector?
Like I said, there's good and bad in every society, every community, every group. And in the same way, as far as landlords are concerned, there are landlords who are only looking at their economic benefit and nothing else. Nothing else bothers
what
them.
Happens, sorry to interrupt, but what happens when you put that profit right at the forefront of your business model? The actual whole aspect of rehabilitation and helping the vulnerable will fall on the back burner because the aim is profit.
Okay, so let me try to explain the HMO model as far as the stakeholders are concerned, within this particular program or project, so to speak. The main stakeholder is the government, because they are the ones who have the deepest pockets, and they're the ones who are funding all of this, and they have promises of rehabilitating vulnerable people and having these people being assimilated back into communities, etc. Now, the government has over the years tightened regulation. And there's two main types of regulation. One governs the actual house, the property itself, the bricks and mortar, in relation to its health and safety. And the other regulates the actual support that is being given to the tenant. Now, as far as the regulation of the property is concerned, you must have things like fire doors in place, you must have emergency lighting, smoke alarms, etc. All of these, what do? They are there primarily to ensure that the resident in the property is kept safe.
That is a one-off investment.
If
I was a scrupulous landlord, I'd happily make that investment to modify my property.
You must
put the fire doors in.
You must hear me out. Yeah. You must hear me out. You must give me the opportunity to finish. So that's as far as the property is concerned. Okay, fine. As you mentioned, that these are one-off costs. Looking at it from an economic point of view. Now, the point of view that I'm trying to address this question is that these people are actually receiving the support. And the reason for that is because the government is tightening its regulation. They are following up. So A new tenant has moved into
Just
the property.
clarify that they're tightening the regulation now, or they've already done it
The regulations have got tightened over the years.
over the years.
And wherever they find that there's some kind of a gap where people can exploit something, they try and fill that gap, and they try and not leave any leeway or leverage, for the landlord or for the party that's receiving that rent and the party that is to give that support any kind of opportunity not to do it. Now, a tenant moves in, and before, for months and months, even years, there was no concept of sending the support documentation to the council, so that the council would review to look at it and say, yes, the support is being done, or no, the support is not being done because it's not being done.
That support is being done.
Yes, as far as the government model is concerned, that is the way it was going. However, they have drastically changed their model, and there's much more follow-up. Where the support is being done and carried out properly, the rents continue. Where it's not being done properly, not only do the rents stop, however, there are clawbacks. By clawback, I mean, for example, if one tenant has been with a certain accommodation provider, a certain agent that's managing that property and is responsible for the support and is responsible for the health and safety of the property, if they have not done the support adequately, or for that matter, if they haven't done any support, from the time that that tenant has been there until that time when the support documentation was asked for, whatever rents that they have received in the past, those also shall be returned to the government. Now, in that particular respect, what happens? What does that discourage? Number one, it discourages this idea that I cannot get this money without doing the support. Number two, it also encourages that not only must the support be done and shown to be done, it must be of an adequate nature, according to what the government has mandated, that particular support provider or the housing association to do. And number three, what is this doing? This is basically ensuring that a robust system is put into place, where the whole idea of having this kind of accommodation, where the government is paying much more than a local housing allowance rate, would pay, is so that these vulnerable people can be helped, supported, and assimilated back into society.
But look, previously there was no onus on the so-called housing providers, which I keep referring to as I'm not saying everybody's a scrupulous landlord, but we are focusing on the scrupulous private landlords who are rinsing this sector to make money for their own, obviously, financial gain. So previously there was no onus on them to submit any paperwork to clearly show that they are supporting these tenants.
That's right.
But how much more has the system changed? Is it just a question of just ticking a box now and sending a checklist saying that we are helping this tenant A and tenant B?
It doesn't work like that. If you look at the support elements, there are 5 main elements of support. The first element is to do with benefits and ensuring that they are on the correct benefits, whichever one they should be eligible for, they're getting, because that is their right. Further into the same section, we have an area where we look at budgeting for the tenant. Okay, this is how much benefits you're receiving, right? You don't need to pay any rent. You don't need to pay any utilities. There may be a service charge element involved, or there may not be a service charge element involved, depending on whether there has been agreement between the service provider and the actual tenant. In most cases, there is a service charge element, and currently it's about £17 a week. And then it's to see that, okay, fine, because you don't have any of these expenses, your main expense is really food expense. So let's try to budget and see if within the benefits that you're receiving, can we still make a saving? Even if it's a very small saving, can we make a saving? What does that do? That kind of creates a mindset that allows that particular person to become responsible for their finances. They know exactly how much income they're getting, they know exactly how much expenditure there is, and what that does is that makes them financially more responsible, and that's what we want to achieve. And if you allow me to finish, as far as the support is concerned, that's the benefits element and the budgeting element. Then we have a be healthy element, which is to do with, okay, they've moved into an area, they could have moved out from fairly far, maybe even out of the city. Are they registered with the GP? Do they have any mental health issues? Do they have any physical health issues? Okay, if they do, how can we address them? As support providers, we are not qualified to be able to give that kind of technical support in relation to mental health or in relation to anything else.
So this is from the point of view of the landlord.
Yes, that's right. So I'm trying to explain to you what a landlord is mandated to do under this system.
This is all landlords are now mandated.
Yes, all landlords are mandated to do this.
Well,
And this
maybe
this is where the concept of that unscrupulous landlord who was raking millions out of the system, and they were, I'm not denying that that this hasn't been the case, but as a consequence, what has happened is where that support paperwork has not been done, or where it has not been done sufficiently enough, there have been clawbacks, and hundreds of thousands of pounds have been taken back. This is public money. It was given for a certain service. That service has not been provided, and now that money will be taken back. What will the knock-on effect be on the landlord or the service provider? Okay, I better get my act straight. I'm to do what the government mandates me to do, because if I don't, I'm not getting any money. At the end of the day, regardless of whether we look at it from right, we look at it from left, we look at it from this angle, from the other angle, the main element for the landlord is the economic element. But if that economic element can be linked in with the ethical element, which is that support being provided, I think we have a model that can work, because
can reform the sector.
Absolutely.
But we're going from our own feedback and the research that we've done in the market,
right,
where we've spoken to tenants,
yep,
and they've said that somebody has come around and just popped their head around the door, asked if they were okay. Excellent. You're looking for a job. You're going out. Yes, great. Tick, tick, tick. Basically, it's a tick box exercise just for them to fulfill their criteria that they are providing support and continue to receive the higher sort of rate of benefit for each of these tenants.
I can assure you that it's not a tick box exercise. Every week, a support session is done, which has got to be done in a way that the reader can see that this is a session that an hour or more has been spent on. So, I mean, if it was just, okay, I've seen the person, yeah, he's okay, he's fine, he's doing this, and this, that's not good enough. If anybody was to submit that kind of paperwork to the government, guess what? They'll be in for a clawback. Really? And it'll be a heavy hand of the government.
There's going to be people a step ahead of the game, and they'll be able to perhaps work around the system to continue enjoying this lucrative rent without having to do the work that's required of them. So
you see,
it's not, the jury's still out on this. I wouldn't say that. You can't say for definite that this system has for definite stamped out the unscrupulous private landlords who are milking the system for their own benefit.
You see, any system is not foolproof. Any system.
Absolutely. So is it better that the government takes control of these tenants directly themselves?
The government does not have the resource, neither the capacity to be able to do that. Now, for that, what does the government need to do? The government needs to directly employ these people, directly have
build houses.
These institutions. I mean, I'm talking about the actual support element here. So if we say that the support element should be addressed directly by the government, as in government employees, that will be a very, very difficult task for the government to accomplish. Now, there's no point reinventing the wheel. Yeah. And even with these private companies, remember, these private companies are employing people. So as far as...
they are not employing people.
No. As far as the private companies are concerned, in order to fulfill this particular objective that the government has given to them, they need to employ people.
Right.
So at the same time, you are getting economic prosperity that's not just coming directly to the landlord, i.e. the owner of the property. It's also coming to people who are who are in service to this particular project, i.e. the support worker, the person who's doing the housing benefits, the person who's on the phone, to the city council, to the tenants, etc. All of these, and the maintenance people, all of these people are being employed. So it's not like if the government directly does it, the government is, going to create more employment, or it's going to be able to do a better job, because at the end of the day, it's about, how well the government can regulate this private enterprise. Because if, for example, if we go under the concept that it should be the government directly, well, then where does that stop? Does the government take over everything and just say, okay, fine, we'll just take control of.
Nationalisation,
Yeah,
whatever.
we'll just control all of this, and the private sector, there's no need for a private sector.
Okay, look, ultimately this business model is flawed from where I see it. Because let's say there was a genuine provider of these social housing where they are trying to help people to get back on their feet, rehabilitate them, get them into jobs. But a single person who has a history of mental illness or drug addiction, or they've come from prison, if they are able to then go get a job, because of the state of the housing market, they will not be able to, I'm not saying not obviously for definite, but they're least likely to be able to climb on the property ladder and go and get their own property. They'll still be forced to take this kind of accommodation in some sort of a HMO where they are just taking a room for themselves, because they might not have the deposit, they may not have the means to sustain a flat or a house entirely by themselves. So ultimately you're keeping them chained in that particular housing complex of HMO. Would you say that's correct?
No, I disagree with that. And even as far as, saying that this particular business model is flawed, I would disagree with that as well. To say that flawed under what sense? I mean, economically, it would make sense. Ethically, okay, there's probably much more to do. However, as explained, as far as the government is concerned, which is the main stakeholder, it is, the main stakeholder that's giving the money. And they're the ones who've initiated the project, so to speak. It is their job to ensure that this is being done properly, and there is regulation, which there is. As far as people, who want to be able to buy their own property is concerned, well, again, it's a stepping stone. You've got to go from one step to the next step to the next step. Now, even with this particular system, as I mentioned to you about the support, where we are training people, we are trying to develop that mindset within them through these support sessions to be able to take responsibility of their finances. Now, if we can encourage these people to take responsibility of their finances, they know exactly how much income they have, exactly how much expenditure they have. What that will do is ultimately that will, gradually take them to a point where they will be able to become independent enough to have, if they can't buy their own property, at least to be able to rent their own property and have a job that can sustain that. As far as the general property market is concerned, now, the supply, the basic principles, of supply and demand, if they are not met and there is an imbalance in that, that is the thing that's going to cause the issue, and that is the cause. We are looking at the symptoms of all of this. It's actually the cause.
There is a housing crisis in this country.
Of course,
yes.
and the cause is a housing supply shortage.
Yeah.
I mean, when we say housing crisis, many people would interpret that in a different way, depending on which stakeholder community or which stakeholder group you belong to, whether you're a tenant, landlord, a government, etc. However, I'd make it very clear to say that it's the number of properties being built in this country that needs to drastically increase if we are to ensure that future generations are able to buy their property. It is very important that this thing is addressed. Now, this obviously involves huge finances, and this involves the private sector being also partnering themselves with the government and doing this. But this is the only way that it's going to happen, and the government needs to build these properties directly, and they need to encourage the private sector to build these properties through incentivizing them, via tax cuts and other things that would basically allow these big housing developers to be able to take that shovel, take that spade, and get on with it.
Building. Look, obviously, this is a vast subject, and we want to just focus
Of course.
in final sort of moments of this show now. I just want to focus on one more thing that comes to mind, is that all these HMOs which have sprung up in our communities are so-called helping vulnerable people. But how are all these vulnerable people being helped before? Or is it a case that we have far more vulnerable people in our society now than ever before? You
see, the thing is, as far as vulnerability is concerned, In some cases, it's genuine. In other cases, it may not be genuine. And again,
I was
that
going
is
to come on to that
and
because
that is the job of the government to assess whether this person is genuinely somebody who is vulnerable or not. Because you see, how do you assess? There has got to be an objective assessment. This person gets benefit A, benefit B, benefit C. Okay, he's eligible. This person is only getting benefit A, or this person is only getting A type of benefit. Does that still make them eligible? Yes or no? These are questions that the government needs to iron out and address, and then make them very, very clear that this is the objective test. You must do this test before anything else. Once this test is done, and the result is okay, this person is eligible, then you move them into the supported accommodation. At this moment in time, I can say to you that there isn't really an objective test, except that
it's a bit subjective.
Sorry, just allow me to finish. Except that a person is on benefit, any type of benefit.
This is exactly my point. There's two issues which I have seen come up in this sector, why I've said to you that this is open to fraud. Number one, there are people who are being put forward who are not vulnerable, and they're being classified as vulnerable in order to get the higher rate and make them eligible for these benefits. And number two, there was a case in Birmingham, or cases in Birmingham, where a lot of ghost tenants have been created in these HMOs, and maybe some of these are now already subject to investigation. But are you aware of the fact that there's many housing providers who create these ghost tenants and also put forward tenants who they say are vulnerable, who need this extra assistance, but they don't really do so?
You see, the thing is, with something like that, there isn't any infrastructure in place to actually physically
to verify
for the government, employee from city council, etc., to go out and to see, okay, this is number tenant A, B, C. They're living here, and they're being supported. There's only two things that they can see. Number one, an inspection that takes place on a quarterly basis. Initially, these inspections used to take place once a year. Properties used to fall into a dilapidated state. Before, there were no inspections. Right? So, as I mentioned, that the regulation of the government has moved in favor of protecting its project and of showing to the taxpayer that, we are trying to do everything possible to close all of those gaps that people would try to exploit, and, that they would put the taxpayer out of pocket. So they are doing that. And as far as physically going and seeing on a daily basis, that is near impossible. That can never happen, where it can be checked that, okay, this particular tenant, are they there, are they not there? But the government, obviously, as they have done in the past, they've come up with new structures, new systems that have allowed them to be able to ensure that the support is being given, that the property is being, the property is compliant with all of the health and safety regulation, and I think they must just carry on. And it's a matter of evolution, and we are heading in that direction. But despite all of that, regardless of how more regulated it becomes or how more the robust the system becomes, there will always be gaps within the system, and no system is 100% foolproof.
Afzal Shah, thank you so much. Thank you for your insight on this very complicated, controversial topic, which is the talk of the town, as they say at the moment. And for our viewers, this is a very complicated subject. And as you can see quite clearly, that it is full of flaws and unethical people who are exploiting the system. And yes, as Afzal Shah mentioned, the government is trying its utmost to stamp out this fraud, stamp out the unethical practices, but unfortunately they will never be able to fully regulate and take control of this sector, which is currently out of control, until they actually, in the best way to describe it, is nationalize this whole of this sector and take it directly under their own control. As long as there's private landlords involved and the benefits, financial gains are there, then this will always be subject to abuse and subject to profiteering. May we pray that this sector is regulated to an extent that it does not continue to blight the communities and create the antisocial behaviour that we are seeing. So it's keep watching this space, which will keep reporting on this issue as it evolves, and as we'll see maybe a year down the line or a few months down the line, to see what regulations have been brought in to stamp out these unethical practices. That's all for today's show. Thank you for watching, and do subscribe to our channel for notifications for future programs. We will continue to, inshallah, bring you more interesting topics like this. But for today, Jazakallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.